Right now, somewhere in America, two people are standing at the exact same starting line. Same age, same 24 hours in a day, same access to the internet, the same phone in their pocket, the same ability to open a bank app and check a number that either makes them feel safe or makes their stomach drop. 25 years from now, one of these people will be sitting on a net worth well past $1 million. The other will still be doing quiet math in their head at the checkout line, hoping the card does not decline. And here is the part that should genuinely unsettle you. The difference between those two people has almost nothing to do with luck or talent or the family they happen to be born into. It comes down to one single thing: a gap. A gap so quiet and so invisible that most people will live their entire lives and never even realize it exists. I want to show you exactly what that gap looks like right now in the next 30 seconds, because once you see it, you will never be able to unsee it. Picture a single straight line drawn across a blank page. On the far left is point A. Point A is you today, exactly where you stand financially right this second. On the far right is point B. Point B is the life you actually want. The number in your account that would finally let you exhale. The freedom to not look at the price tag first. The ability to walk away from a job that has been quietly draining you for years. Now look at the empty space stretched out between those 2 points. That space has a name. We call it the performance gap. And here is the rule I need you to burn into your memory before we go one step further. The only real difference between a millionaire and someone who is living paycheck to paycheck is an obsession with closing that gap. Not intelligence, not luck, not even hard work by itself. Obsession. My name is David Marshall, and for the last several years my entire job has been reverse engineering exactly how ordinary, unremarkable, everyday people close that gap. Not with an inheritance, not with a lottery ticket, with a repeatable, learnable system. If that is something you want in your own life, hit subscribe right now, because every single week on this channel, David Marshall Finance, we break down the real mechanics of wealth and the psychology behind why some people stay stuck in that gap forever while others close it completely. Now stay with me, because in the next few minutes I am going to hand you the exact blueprint, and I am also going to tell you the true story of a man who could barely read a page without the letters scrambling in his head, and still ended up outturning every single one of his college-educated coworkers combined. Before we go any further, you need to understand the rule sitting underneath everything else in this video. Every dollar that has ever changed hands in the entire history of human civilization has followed one single law. The amount of money you make is always directly proportional to the amount of perceived value you give to society. Say that with me in your head. Perceived value dictates compensation, not effort, not hours logged, not how exhausted you feel at the end of the day. Perceived value. A garbage collector often works harder physically in a single shift than most executives do in a week, and yet the executive gets paid more because the market perceives their decisions as rarer, riskier, and more valuable to protect. This one sentence is going to come back again and again throughout this video, so lock it in now. Perceived value dictates compensation. Once that sentence actually clicks for you, everything else about closing the performance gap starts falling into place. So the real question becomes, how do you actually find perceived value, and how do you position yourself directly inside it? This is exactly where most hardworking, talented people get it wrong, and it is the quiet reason so many of them stay stuck in that gap their entire working lives. In a moment, I'm going to draw you 3 overlapping circles that will change the way you look at your own career forever. But hold on to that promise I made you a minute ago, because before this video ends, you're going to hear exactly how a man with no diploma, no credentials, and a learning disability that humiliated him publicly as a child built a multi-million-dollar business while people with every advantage he never had stayed stuck behind a desk. Let's talk about the value zone. Picture 3 circles drawn on a whiteboard, each one overlapping the other, the way you probably remember from a high school math class, except this particular diagram determines the entire trajectory of your financial life. The first circle represents the things you like to do, the work that does not feel like work. The projects you would still tinker with even on a Saturday morning, even if nobody was paying you a single cent. The second circle represents the things you are naturally good at, not the things you are decent at because you forced yourself to grind for 10 years out of obligation, but the skills that seem to come to you faster and more naturally than they come to the people standing right next to you. The third circle represents the things society is currently paying high rates for. This circle has nothing to do with your feelings at all. It is simply a cold, honest look at what the market is actually willing to pay for right now, today, in this economy. Here is where it gets interesting. Most people spend their entire career living inside only one of these circles, and every single one of these circles on its own is a trap. If you only chase what you like to do while ignoring whether you are actually good at it or whether anyone will pay you for it, you end up in what I call the passion trap. You love the work, sure, but you are doing it for close to minimum wage, wondering why loving your job does not seem to be paying your rent. If you only chase what you are naturally good at, without checking whether you actually enjoy it or whether it pays well, you end up highly competent and completely bored, quietly watching the clock every single day of your working life. And if you only chase whatever society happens to pay the most for, ignoring whether you like it or whether you're even good at it, you fall into the most common trap of all, the miserable burnout. High income, empty calendar, and a body that is slowly falling apart from stress you cannot even name out loud. I have personally met people living inside every single one of these traps, and from the outside, some of them genuinely look successful. But closing the performance gap was never about picking one circle. It is about finding the small, narrow sliver in the exact middle where all three circles overlap at once. That sliver has a name. We call it the value zone. It is the place where what you love, what you're good at, and what society will pay a serious premium for all collide in the same spot. And once you actually find your own value zone, work stops feeling like a slow countdown to Friday and starts feeling like compound interest for your entire life. Finding your value zone is the first half of the equation. The second half is knowing exactly what vehicle to put it in. Once you know where your value zone actually lives, you need a vehicle to turn it into real money, and there are exactly two vehicles that matter here: the active vehicle and the passive vehicle. Let's start with the active vehicle, because this is how almost every wealthy person on earth actually generated their first real chunk of capital. The active vehicle is simply you trading a skill that sits inside your value zone for money in real time. If you're starting from absolute zero, I want you to start with a service-based business run entirely off a laptop. Why a laptop specifically? Because it is one of the only business models in modern history with essentially zero setup cost. No warehouse, no inventory sitting in a garage, no employees on payroll, no loan from a bank hanging over your head. Just a skill that lives inside your value zone, a laptop, and a client willing to pay you for the perceived value you provide them. Copywriting, consulting, design work, sales, video editing. It genuinely does not matter which one, as long as it sits inside that overlapping sliver we just talked about a minute ago. The active vehicle is how you generate your first real capital. But here is the mistake that keeps otherwise smart, capable people broke for their entire lives. They treat the active vehicle as the final destination instead of what it actually is, the starting line. Trading your time directly for money, no matter how much money per hour, will always eventually hit a ceiling because there are only so many hours in a single day, and eventually you simply run out of time left to sell. That is exactly where the passive vehicle comes in. The passive vehicle is money working on your behalf without you. The most reliable version of this, the version that has quietly created more millionaires in modern history than almost any other method on earth, is auto-investing into something like an S&P 500 index fund, or building your own custom dividend pies, a basket of dividend-paying stocks that pay you simply for owning a slice of them. Now I want to show you a number, and I need you to actually sit with it for a second, because most people scroll straight past this without letting it land. If you invest just $5 a day every single day for 25 years and let it compound inside something like an S&P 500 index fund, you're only putting in roughly $45,000 of your own money across that entire quarter century. $45,000. Less than the price of a brand new truck. And through the quiet, boring, completely unglamorous power of compounding, that $45,000 can grow into a portfolio worth over $1,040,000. Say that back to yourself. $5 a day, $45,000 out of pocket, $1,040,000 waiting on the other end. That is not a lottery ticket, and it is not a hot stock tip from somebody on the internet. That is math, cold, repeatable, almost boring math. The active vehicle earns you the money. The passive vehicle multiplies it while you are asleep, while you are at your day job, while you are living your actual life. And the people who close the performance gap the fastest are always the ones running both vehicles at the exact same time. Let's check the scoreboard for a second. You now know the rule: perceived value dictates compensation. You know the diagram, the value zone, where what you love, what you're good at, and what society pays for all collide. And you know the two vehicles, active and passive, working together. That is the strategy half of this video. Now we need to talk about the part almost nobody wants to hear, because knowing the strategy means absolutely nothing if you never actually execute it. Here is the problem: even after you know your value zone, even after you understand the active and passive vehicles, most people still will not close the gap. Why? Because they never audit their own resources. You only have 3 resources in this entire life that actually matter for building wealth: money, time, and energy. And most people are quietly bleeding out all 3 of them every single day without ever noticing it happening. This is what I call the resource allocation audit, and I want you to actually do this with me right now in your head. Picture your week as a single bar sliced into segments, almost like a pie chart cut into wedges. Now be brutally honest with yourself about how those wedges are actually being spent. How many hours this week went into scrolling? Not researching, not learning, just scrolling, doom scrolling through a feed engineered by some of the smartest software engineers alive specifically to keep your thumb moving and your brain quietly numb. How many hours went into gaming, not as a rare, healthy form of relaxation, but as a default escape hatch from a life you have been avoiding dealing with? Here is the uncomfortable truth sitting underneath all of it. Every single one of those hours carries what I call a perceived value ratio of 0. Zero perceived value to the marketplace means $0 ever flowing back to you from it. Meanwhile, that exact same hour redirected toward a skill inside your value zone, or toward your active vehicle, or toward learning how compounding actually works, carries a perceived value ratio that can genuinely be worth thousands of dollars over the course of a lifetime. This is not about eliminating rest completely. Your energy is a real resource too, and burning it to nothing while chasing money with zero recovery will destroy you just as fast as wasting it on a screen every night. The resource allocation audit is not about punishment, it is about awareness. Once you actually see clearly and honestly where your money, your time, and your energy are quietly leaking out, you suddenly unlock resources you would have sworn on your life you never had. That is not a coincidence. That is the performance gap closing, one honest audit at a time. There is one more force multiplying everything we have covered so far, and almost nobody teaches it correctly. When people leave school, whether that is high school, college, or a trade program, most of them quietly assume their education is finished. They treat learning like a chapter of life that ends the exact day someone hands them a piece of paper. Financially speaking, this belief is one of the most expensive mistakes a person can ever make, because the truth is, once you leave school, your learning is not supposed to stop. It is supposed to start compounding. I call this knowledge compounding, and it works almost exactly like the compound interest we already talked about inside your passive vehicle. Every new practical skill you pick up, woodworking, sales, coding, negotiation, public speaking, does not just sit there by itself isolated. It stacks directly on top of every other skill you already have, and it starts revealing patterns that were completely invisible to you before you had it. Someone who understands both sales and coding starts noticing business opportunities that a person who only understands one or the other will walk right past without ever seeing them. Someone who understands basic finance and basic human psychology starts noticing exactly why certain products sell effortlessly and others quietly fail no matter how good they are. This is knowledge compounding in action, and it is one of the quiet reasons wealthy people almost seem to get luckier as they get older. It is not luck at all. It is pattern recognition built from years of stacked, compounding knowledge applied directly inside their own value zone. The performance gap closes faster for people who never let their brain go dormant the day they walked off a graduation stage. Now, I promised you a story earlier, and it is time to tell it, because nothing makes these ideas more real than watching two actual lives play out on opposite ends of the same gap. I want to tell you about a man named Derek Malone. When Derek was in 3rd grade, a teacher stood him up in front of his entire class and read his essay out loud, mocking every single misspelled word while the other kids laughed. Derek had severe dyslexia, a condition that was barely understood or accommodated back then, and by the time he reached high school, he had already quietly decided he was, in his own words, the dumb kid in the room. He dropped out before graduation. No diploma, no credentials, no safety net waiting for him underneath. He took a job on a construction site, hauling drywall for slightly above minimum wage. And even there, his coworkers found new ways to humiliate him, handing him work orders they knew would scramble in his head, laughing openly when he had to ask someone else to read it out loud for him. Here is the part that separates Derek from almost everyone else stuck in that exact same situation. Derek treated every single one of those circumstances, the dyslexia, the bullying, the missing diploma, as an obstacle to overcome instead of an excuse to stop. There's a phrase I want you to remember for the rest of your life. Excuses, not obstacles, are the single biggest reason people fail to close the gap. An obstacle is simply something standing in your way. An excuse is the story you quietly tell yourself about why that obstacle means you should just quit. Derek could have used his dyslexia as a completely reasonable excuse to give up entirely. Nobody on earth would have blamed him. Instead, he started listening to audiobooks about sales and construction, estimating during every single drive to and from that job site. He stumbled into his value zone almost by accident. He genuinely liked working with his hands and being outdoors. He was naturally good at reading a room and talking to nervous homeowners in a way that instantly put them at ease. And skilled construction estimating, it turned out, was something homeowners were more than willing to pay a serious premium for, especially from someone who could walk them through the numbers in plain, honest English instead of confusing industry jargon. Derek started his active vehicle with almost nothing at all, a phone and a reputation built one honest estimate at a time. Within a few years, he was running his own contracting company. Within a decade, that same company was pulling in multiple millions of dollars a year in revenue. Now let's talk about a man named Chris Bennett. Chris went to a well-regarded university on a partial scholarship, graduated with a solid degree, and had every single advantage Derek never had: full literacy, an actual diploma, a supportive, stable family, zero learning disabilities standing in his way. Chris took a comfortable corporate job right out of college and on paper looked like the obvious future success story between the two of them. But Chris had a different problem entirely. Every single time he got close to building something of his own, a side business, an investment plan, a new skill outside of work, something shinier would appear and pull his attention away. A new hobby, a new online course, a hot stock tip from a coworker at the water cooler. Chris fell victim to what I call shiny object syndrome, chasing instant gratification over and over again, instead of putting in the hard, boring, unglamorous focus required to actually close his own performance gap. 15 years later, Chris is still sitting at that same company, still living paycheck to paycheck despite a six-figure salary, still quietly telling himself that once things settle down, he will finally start investing, finally start that side business, finally get serious about his own future. Derek, the man who could not read a restaurant menu without the letters scrambling in his head, is now worth more money than Chris will likely earn across his entire working life combined. The difference was never talent, it was never credentials, it was not even luck. Derek understood something that Chris never fully grasped. If you are not willing to make sacrifices for your dream becomes the sacrifice. This is what I call the locus of sacrifice. Everyone who closes the performance gap sacrifices something. The only real question is what you choose to sacrifice and whether you choose it on purpose. Derek sacrificed the evenings he could have spent numbing out and traded them instead for audiobooks playing quietly in his truck. He sacrificed the instant gratification of an easier, lower-effort life in exchange for years of hard, unglamorous focus that most people are simply not willing to put in. Chris, without ever fully realizing it, sacrificed something too. He sacrificed his own potential, one shiny distraction at a time, one more year of waiting for things to settle down, one more excuse quietly dressed up as a reasonable delay. Every single day you are choosing your own locus of sacrifice, whether or not you ever stop to notice it. The only real question left is whether you are choosing it on purpose or letting it choose you. Let's go back to that line we drew together at the very beginning of this video. Point A, exactly where you're standing right now. Point B, the life you actually want. And that quiet space stretched out in the middle, the performance gap. You now have the entire blueprint sitting right in front of you. You know how to find your own value zone, the intersection of what you love, what you are naturally good at, and what society is actually willing to pay for. You know the difference between an active vehicle and a passive vehicle, and you have seen the exact math behind how $5 a day can quietly compound into over $1 million. You know how to run a resource allocation audit on your own money, your time, and your energy, and you understand that knowledge compounding never stops the day you walk off a graduation stage. And now, you know the real difference between an obstacle and an excuse, because you just watched what happens to the person who chooses one over the other. The performance gap does not close itself. It closes because one single, ordinary person decided to become obsessed with closing it. That person can be you. If this video handed you even one piece of your own blueprint today, hit subscribe right now, because every single week here on David Marshall Finance, I hand you another piece of the exact system that turns point A into point B. I will see you in the next one.